Trump says that Zelensky is the only one who does not agree with the peace plan, and that Russia is not. That Russia is ready. At the same time, the Kremlin says if it has not seen any peace deal options. So let's talk about Trump's policy and where it may lead with Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication and Media at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Mr. Dobriansky, nice to see you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me on.
So what do you think? Trump says Zelensky is the only who doesn't want peace. Who else did Trump actually ask about this?
Yeah, it seems to be that President Trump likes to be repeating what is last said in the room. We can only expect that when he says that Mr. Zelensky doesn't want peace, that he's hearing from members of his own staff who say this, possibly even Steve Witkoff, who repeats, as we know, everything that he hears in the Kremlin. What we do know is that Ukraine is the only party that's ready to have peace in this war against Ukraine. Ukraine has offered a full ceasefire almost 300 days ago now at this point. And we also know that as far as what's happening within the peace deal, President Trump has said some crazy statements, including that he doesn't believe that President Zelensky has read the proposed peace deal. And on the same day that he says that, President Zelensky is going point by point with Ukrainian media, explaining what's in the peace deal and what's not. I would doubt that we could have President Trump explain the peace deal in that kind of way.
Trump says he is ready to help Ukraine with security if a peace deal is signed, but he doesn't explain what kind of help this would be. All these real security guarantees, are they real from United States, and what we are talking about?
Well, the main question has to do with how this integrates with Ukraine's other security arrangements. Is Ukraine going to go into NATO at an accelerated pace as they're supposed to enter the European Union? We know that any kind of guarantee needs to be on the level of a Category 5 from NATO because this kind of peace deals that Trump himself has said that he has made, we now see that Cambodia and Thailand are in open conflict. We now see that there are hundreds of thousands fleeing the combat situation in Rwanda and Congo, with the situation worsening by the day. There was just another Security Council meeting on that conflict. This is one of the conflicts that President Trump himself has sought to be nominated for the Peace Prize because of his work. None of those agreements included security guarantees, and that's the reason Ukraine is not budging until they finally get an answer from the United States.
What is Trump's personal interest, how do you think, in putting pressure on Ukraine in favor of Russia?
From one end, Trump is only obsessed with his own legacy. He wants history books to remember him for anything that he has done, which is why he has been touting these 8 peace deals, which haven't worked out. He's also rebuilding the White House and other ways of cementing him in history, not just in his first term when he was when he left office in disgrace after January 6th. He wants something that will last for a century. And he believes that having a solid relationship with Russia will make him that. It's unfortunate because we know every other politician in history who has proposed a deal with Russia has regretted it. So we will see what happens going forward. But either it's president's legacy that he's concerned about, or if you're thinking about his chief negotiators and intermediaries, that's Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, they're mostly interested in business deals, not so much for the United States, but their personal business deals. So they want to have a deal so that they can develop housing and other energy interests in Russia.
Today Zelensky was in Kupiansk, and how do you see he is trying to show the real situation on front? How do you think was this some kind of sign to Trump?
I think it came across very well in American media today. I watched all the main news shows today. Everybody mentioned with not possibly pronouncing Kupiansk, but they knew that it was important that President Zelensky was there. They saw the pictures, and they were told that this was an area that Russia themselves has been saying is under their control. It was a very positive sign in the American media for this reason. However, we know that just like the Russians talking about their victories, it's not about every square inch. It's really about what is going to be the lasting peace deal here, or ceasing of operations, because it's not fair to anybody for this to go further. I'm saying not fair to anybody in Ukraine or Europe. I really don't care about Russia. They're the ones who started this war, and they're the ones who should be prosecuted in a court for this. But beyond that, these kind of meters, kilometers here and there is not the important part. The important part will be how this gets stopped, and what the repercussions are. I already mentioned, some kind of international court or tribunal for the Russians, and that's the most important thing. In fact, it's being argued in several conferences coming up that agreeing to either amnesty or any kind of forgiveness for Russian crimes would be against the Geneva Conventions and international conventions that are signed by both Russia and Ukraine.
I don't know, is it fake or true, but it seems like Russian propagandist Solovyov was in Pokrovsk today. And how do you think what Russia's propaganda trying to show with this with Solovyov who's walking on Pokrovsk?
Well, just like the images of President Zelensky in Kupiansk, again, this is just about a meter or several kilometers this way, several kilometers this. I remember in the period between 2015 and 2022, when I was talking to people who were defending Ukraine's front lines, that it would shift kilometers a day sometimes, where Ukrainian soldiers would sleep in the enemy mines one day, and then they would come back the other side. So this territory, this showing that we've taken Pokrovsk from the Russian side, really means not that much, especially if anybody in America or the West can do a Google search for how many times Russia has said that Pokrovsk is ours for the last year and a half. It's actually pretty sad that they think that this is a great victory, not least of which we can all from the West point out to American leaders and Western leaders, look at what they're celebrating. Look at this leveled city. This is not a city that they are taking over. This is very similar to the Donetsk airport, simply a piece of land, and they've leveled the entire thing on top of it. For that reason, I think anytime that Russia tries to hail its victories, it's another way for all of us activists in the West to point out to Western leaders that really they're not taking care, they're not occupying any territory. They're just looking at the land itself, not buildings, not people, not infrastructure.
Putin earlier said he would invite journalists to occupy it. He said that the Pokrovsk and Kupiansk are an occupied cities, and he invited journalists to these cities, Ukrainian cities. And after all, now we can see the Zelensky on Kupiansk. How do you think, should we expect any answer from Putin, and what could it be?
The only answer will be more attacks. Anytime that Ukraine has something to show to the West, even anytime Ukraine is speaking closely with the West, that's the moment that Putin will launch as many drone attacks, glide bombs, ballistic missiles. We especially see that anytime that President Zelensky is talking directly with President Trump. That's the night that we will have a lot of missiles, and we try to point that out to the White House to make sure they understand that President Putin is not respecting this peace process. I really feel that, in fact, I read that one of the requests by President Erdogan today, when he was meeting with Putin, was for a ceasefire, again, something that President Trump asked for back in March, all the way back in March to President Putin. So until we get that kind of ceasefire or some evidence that Russia would be interested in making a deal, I think it's going to have to go forward with Ukraine demonstrating Kupiansk, demonstrating the extraordinary drone attack that Ukraine did on Russian positions over the last several weeks. Anything to show the West that so long as you support Ukraine, Russia has no chance.
Talking about peace plan, how do you assess the recent actions of the United States? Is this kind of pressure between partners, I mean, Ukraine and the United States?
More and more reporting is coming out about what happened in the last month, the way that this proposal was brought to President Trump. He agreed that that the negotiators should address it, and we had it shown to Ukraine. It was a Russian capitulation plan. As soon as it came out in the West, in terms of what the details were, we had senator after senator, both Republican and Democrat, condemning this as a capitulation plan. Really, no political support here in the United States. And at the same time, this was what was presented as an official U.S. position. So I think the more Ukraine can understand that sometimes Trump will give you a deadline of a couple of days to agree with something crazy, it's clear that there's no bad after effects for saying, you know what, let's continue talking about this. And in fact, I believe that the peace process has borne great fruit in the closeness of the negotiations between the United States and Ukraine.
How do you think, talking about this peace plan, there was some information in media about some points of this peace plan. What should Ukraine prepare for?
Well, I think the important thing for Ukraine is when it shows up for a peace plan, they don't send real estate dealers to make this deal. They're sending military intelligence, generals, national security directors, and diplomats. And these are people who can say, thank you very much. It's a very interesting peace plan. But here is how your proposal lines up with the Ukrainian constitution, with your American laws, with international laws. So there are some things right from the very beginning, like even declaring at the very beginning that we reaffirm Ukrainian sovereignty. Well, Ukrainian sovereignty is assumed if it's a part of this peace process. If it were not to have sovereignty, then it would not have decisions about its own army, decisions about its future associations with NATO and the EU. And that's really something that the Ukrainian National Liberation Movement has been all about. For centuries, Ukrainians have sought to be a nation recognized equal to other nations. Not that we are a nation that is subject to approval by the United States or Russia, but equal on the parts of others. So long as Ukraine can keep explaining what international law is, and that includes no amnesty for Russian war crimes, that includes understanding that you cannot recognize territory claimed by force, neither under the Ukrainian constitution nor under US law that forbids this kind of recognition. And third of all, international law, especially the UN Charter, which expressly forbids the recognition by any nation of territory claimed under force. So this is going to be a problem for Russia going forward.
I want to thank you for your words and your position. And next, I want to talk about Europe. Under the Pearl program, Europe allocated 5 billion euros for buying US weapon in 2026. But this seems too little for an army at war. And as I understand, we shouldn't expect any financial help from the US either.
Absolutely. Even so, we've had a couple of updates from the United States, and I'll tie this with Europe. So last week, we had the release of a new national security strategy that completely ignored Russia for the most part, other than saying they wanted to have better relations with Russia in certain words. And what countered that was the National Defense Authorization in Congress that came out, which included money for weapons for Ukraine. But the big difference is, even though this was stood against the national security policy and the ideas of J.D. Vance and others in the White House about moving away from supporting Ukraine, the defense budget of the United States only allocated something close to $400 million for defense, both in 25 and 26, for helping Ukraine. That's very different than the $33 billion the last time we passed the defense budget for helping Ukraine. And that's when you bring up $5 billion, again, this is a pittance compared to what that $33 billion of US aid was earlier. I think it's just going to have to be the fact that we're not just going to rely on NATO partners, but I know that Australia announced some weapons it's purchasing under the Pearl initiative as well and donating weapons. There are other countries outside of NATO, including Japan and others, that could support Ukraine even more. But in the end, it's going to be a lot of Ukrainian innovation itself. As I've told my Republican friends who deal with the White House, this is not Biden's war, as President Trump said. Biden's war was different. We had tanks, we had artillery. This is a drone warfare.
Absolutely.
Where thankfully we had last month we had 7 members of the Tretova Shturmova Brigada. They were here in the United States, explaining that upwards of 80% of casualties are now coming from drones. And this is not something that the United States Army is ready for or anybody else. And we need to support Ukraine. Otherwise, it's going to be the other side. China, Iran, Russia, in North Korea, those are the ones who are going to win in the battle of drones. And that's not something the United States wants.
And how do you see, what is Europe counting on? An end to the war?
It's very interesting because Europe is, as we know, a confederation of different countries, many of which have internal political decisions to make in the coming year. Even though the new chancellor of Germany has been very supportive of Ukraine, we have seen also political forces like AfD and others ready to win in local elections and showing that they could win in the national election. So Scholz needs to figure out, Merz has to figure out what the next steps are for their political future. The same thing in France, the same thing in the United Kingdom. Even Italy, as strong a supporter as Meloni is, she had to announce that they are pausing any purchases under the Pearl program of NATO for additional weapons for Ukraine. And that's all because of domestic political questions. This has always happened in the United States. I've worked on legislation for years, sometimes immigration, other things for Ukraine. And then at the very end, the legislation falls apart because of a domestic issue like abortion or gun rights that has nothing to do with the legislation, but we can't get senators and congressmen to work together. So I think for Europe, the big question isn't whether they want to. They clearly want to help Ukraine in terms of their leadership. It's a question of whether domestically helping Ukraine ends up changing their governments, which means that no help for Ukraine will come.
Mr. Dobriansky, I very appreciate you for this interview and for your position once again. And I'd like to ask our viewers, please support us, press the button like under this video, comment this video, and I'm very thankful for your activity. I'll remind you that Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication and Media at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, was the guest of this stream. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!